Last honest look, I talked about the command structure of film and TV productions, how it relates to RWBY, and what changes in direction the series has had. And even though I explicitly stated these videos are not about the writing, and most of you got that, some of you still couldn't wrap your heads around the fact that by direction, I mean directing, the job of a director. So let's hope by talking about something a little more specific, I'm able to get into the meat and potatoes of what I think about RWBY. Rule of cool is kinda dumb, but it's also kinda awesome. I first heard the term rule of cool when I first started watching RWBY. Before then, I always heard it called the fuck you, that's why rule. Rule of cool is what separates science fiction from science fantasy, and RWBY takes the fantasy side even further than most other science fantasies. The ultimate example of rule of cool is the lightsaber. Signature weapon of the Jedi Knight, and also completely dumb and impractical when you take the world seriously. It requires mastery of the Force to even be a feasible weapon, it lacks any guard or pommel, resulting in it being hard to keep control of, and using it like a sword is dumb too because it's technically a melting stick. All you have to do is poke someone with it for it to melt through, so why spend unnecessary energy swinging it like a sword with a defined blade that requires force to cut through objects? Fuck you, that's why. RWBY's weapons follow a similar logic or lack thereof and establishes this right out the gate with RWBY's weapon. A giant scythe is the most impractical thing you can hope to design. It has a very specific yet limited range where it's useful. The shape of the blade is meant to cut grass, not flesh and bone. Crescent Rose doesn't even have a back blade, which makes it even worse. And as any cosplayer can attest, having all those metal chunks around the shaft is killer on the hands. Not to mention how heavy and lopsided a chunk of metal like that would be, and how fragile something with so many moving parts is. Weapons in the real world are designed with specific purposes and play into human dimensions: cost efficiency, mass and weight distribution, effective range and durability. RWBY's weapons ignore all of these. In fact, in the whole of the series, the only weapons that even begin to be practical for human use are the very generic ones, which includes John's sword, which the show goes out of its way to make fun of. Let's run down some other weapons. Weiss's rapier is used more as a wand, and I'm okay with that. There's also this misconception that rapiers are flimsy and can't slice. They actually are as heavy as an arming sword, the weight distribution is just different. They can cut, but because the weight is in the grip and not the blade, it doesn't have the same ability to create momentum and force to cut through objects. But we're dealing with superpowered people, so that's not even an issue, just something I wanted to say. Almost every other weapon has these same issues. Even more normal looking ones like Yatsuhashi's giant blade. If he's strong enough to wield that, then he'd be able to wield a more conventional sword with greater speed, equal force, and less unnecessary use of energy. And now that I've bothered you with some thoughts on weapons, let's talk about costumes. Because for the most part, the designs are just as impractical. Why wear armor when you have aura? Why wear armor but then not protect your most vital area? Why wear capes if you have a speed semblance that can get it caught on stuff? All these seem like writing issues, but they're not. They're all further evidence that all of the artists and designers working on RWBY are more focused on making things look over the top and awesome than they are at making something smart and grounded. Overall, I do like the way most of the characters looked early on, particularly RWBY, Ozpin, and pretty much anyone from Atlas. Even characters I end up hating like Coco have really good designs. Even the off-putting inconsistencies in the faunus design, like Blake having 2 sets of ears, goes back to that initial rule of cool. The redesigns were alright, many of them being upgrades, but new characters like Oscar and Hazel suffered from something I'll address in a minute. The major exception is Blake, who, this isn't the time or place, or you know what, fuck it. This is exactly the place. Final Fantasy ruined character design. Characters with spiky hair, dumb-looking weapons, and more belts and zippers than a gimp shop might have been hip and cool in 90s Japan, but it's 2019. Can we please have something that actually looks good in motion? Blake's Mistral arc design looks like she stole one of her dad's coats, for crying out loud. Rule of thumb, the more detailed something looks, the harder it is to make it look good in motion, which explains why Berserk 2016 looks even worse than any RWBY volume. Now, I'm more on the side of Maya RWBY looking better than Poser RWBY, but one area where it lacks is color. I don't know if this is a directing thing or growing pains, or if Maya's lighting system is more robust and therefore harder to manage, but colors in RWBY Volume 4 onward look muted. Most of the new characters like Oscar, Hazel, and Watts have the same earth tone color scheme. Judd looks like Casper during daylight scenes in Volume 4, and RWBY looks even more ghastly. The reds and greens just don't pop like they used to. The amount of characters and costumes are too numerous to adequately list off in the confines of this video, but with few exceptions they've already range from okay to pretty solid. The same can't be said of the Grimm, which are supposed to be these nightmarish, ever-present monsters, yet more times than not look derpy. Too many of them, like the Nevermore and Ursai, are just big animals with bony plates, and even standouts like the Apathy and Nuclavi end up looking a little more spurgy than they would with better directing and editing. The Vistas hold up a lot better. Sure, there's a lot of asset reusal with the same stretch of Mysterilian forest and the same city block of Vale and the same classroom set piece, but then you get things like Ozpin's office with the ticking clockwork, and Amity Coliseum with its shape-shifting terrain, or Kuro Yuri with its desolate streets that really punctuates the scenes without drawing too much attention away from the characters. That is, unless there's a fight scene going on. The Nuclavi fight in Volume 4 is especially bad about buildings teleporting in and out of existence. And though that's more of an editing issue, and I'll get into that in the future, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least give it a passing mention here. Overall, RWBY is a good example of rule of cool and what happens when you value art over animation. There's no shortage of artists working on the series and fan artists constantly making the most of it. If I wanted practical, I want to be watching a show where the main character uses a giant scythe. Not all the designs are good, but even the bland ones have their own appeal that makes them excellent fodder for screen grabs, memes, and fan projects. Is it for everyone? Hell no. Even for me, someone who usually has a high tolerance for certain aesthetic choices, it really pushes it. But it gets worse when you take in animation, which happens to be the subject of my next honest look. I'm Mediocrity4, thanks for watching.